Hello, everybody. This is Kiara Windrider. I'm at my beach home south of Bombay in India. And so I thought I'd continue with some readings from the trilogy, starting with Issa, Son of the Sun. So, welcome to this podcast. Um, we've gone through 15 chapters in the last few weeks. And so I want to just continue on. So we'll take some days just continuing with the story, and then maybe later we'll get back into some interviews. I feel like we're going through such an interesting phase of human history, going through intense transformation on all fronts. Some of it looks absolutely horrendous, but in spite of all that, there's a possibility of transformation as we've never seen in our lives. It's up to us. It's up to us how deeply and how consciously you're willing to enter into this story. So, what I'd like to do now is continue with the other story, Issa's story, which has relevance for each of us right now because it's an archetypal story. It's not the story of one man having certain experiences, even though it's not necessarily the story that is known in the Christian world. It's a very different story from perspectives in India, in Kashmir, in Persia, from the Buddhist, the Jain, the Hindu, the Farsi, and the Tibetan traditions. So I'd like to continue with this story, and then at some point, I think the time will come when we can grapple with our current story and our current paradigm of history. All right, so here we go. Chapter 16, Goodbyes. The next day, Issa met with Agnivesh again. It had been 3 years since he had entered the life of a monk. He had developed deep insight into the essence of the sacred scriptures and had joined his heart, mind, and will as one. His Kundalini channels were open, and there was a charisma and magnetic radiation that shone from within. He had passed the test of celibacy with Marie and had matured in wisdom and inner strength. And he spoke Sanskrit as fluently as any native. The student and teacher embraced each other. You have done well, my son, the Pandit said, his eyes unexpectedly moist. You have learned all you can with us and are ready now to teach the path of wisdom. You may remain with us as a teacher if you wish, but I feel there is another destiny calling you. Yes, Panditji, Issa confirmed. I've been wishing to visit the holy city of Varanasi and then spend some time with the followers of the Buddha. I would like your permission to go there. The light of the Paramatma is strong within you. You have my permission and also my blessing. Old Agnivesh placed his hands on Issa's head, generating a current of positive energy, which flowed through his body, suffusing him with well-being. They embraced one last time. May you be protected in all your journeys, Issa, and may you fulfill the destiny you came for. Agnivesh's benign smile portrayed the memories of the years together. As Issa walked away, he would miss the boy's sharp mind and refreshing spirit. He sensed that the times ahead would not be easy for him. Issa was gifted with a heart that was sensitive and true, which did not always do so well in a world where innocence had been swallowed up in the petty tyrannies of small-minded men. He took a deep sigh. Agnivesh knew that Issa would remain in his heart and his prayers for as long as he lived. Chapter 17, testing of Marie. There was one more thing Issa would need to do before taking his leave of Puri. He knew Agnivesh would support him in this, for their hearts and minds had fused together into a single flame of truth. As he approached the Council of Elders, headed by the Shankaracharya to receive his sacred thread, he made a request of them. "You have observed me these past many months," he told them, "and you have seen that the temple priestess Marie has been with me all this time, learning the truths of the ancient scriptures just as I have. I urge you before God to allow this woman whom I trained and never defiled to become a monk honored by initiation." These words caused much dissension, for never before had a woman been allowed to take this holy initiation. But the women and the elders of the city stood up and urged the priests to allow Marie to be tested. And among the priests, Agnivesh himself also cast his vote in her favor. A great riot erupted in the temple, but eventually she was allowed to be tested, passed, and reluctantly initiated. She was then given over into the custody of Issa, for her guardians in the temple were not willing to take responsibility for her after that. Marie would have been 14 or 15 at that time. Issa took her away, going towards the river, but after some time she lost him in the crowds and became badly frightened, for the temple had been her home since childhood, and she had never set foot out in the world beyond. She was found by the women of another town and spent several nights with them before Issa was able to track her down. They traveled on together then. To have a traveling companion was new for Issa, for he had become used to traveling on his own, and indeed preferred that. But being with Marie stirred feelings that were unfamiliar and perplexing. On her part, Marie had become used to the cloistered walls of the temple and found this new freedom frightening as well as exhilarating. And she felt a safety and depth of connection with Issa she had not known before. Issa found himself unexpectedly shy at times. In his formal training as a monk, it had been easy for him to resist carnal temptations, for the fires that burned in his heart sought a different master. His was a nature greatly suited to be a sadhu, a wanderer, and a lover of God. But a deep bond was growing between himself and Marie, and he found himself asking how it would be to settle with her and create a family with her. But he also knew with a deep certainty that this was not the destiny he was being called to, and that his role with her was more of a protector, brother, and friend. They spent time in the forests, exulting in the abundance of wild grasses and vegetation. It was the rainy season, and the forest was dense with the sound of porcupines and foxes scurrying, and larger animals like boar and bison pounding their way towards shelter. The perfume of wild grasses and moist earth filled the air. Marie found a cave which became their home base for some time, where they continued to practice the Vedic teachings and yogic rituals they had learned together, raising the path of the Kundalini from the root chakras into the Sahasrara, the crown of creation, where the rivers of infinity had their source. Marie didn't remember much from her life before the temple. There was sometimes a sadness that tugged at her, or memories at the edge of her dreams, which she thought of a forest home among the Adivasis. But here with Issa in the wild forests where she had been born, her senses were awakening, and her innate knowledge of plants and wild creatures was rising to the surface of consciousness. She was no longer the timid and frightened girl that Issa had first met. She had been filled with the demons of self-doubt, uncertainty, and fear when she first knew him. But these months in the primeval forests in deep attunement with the cycles of nature, had wrought a great transformation in her being. It wasn't just her beauty that was blossoming like a guava coming into ripeness, but she was being guided into her own destiny as a teacher. She was making her passage as a woman of power. As she began to deeply immerse herself into the consciousness of her inmost self, she knew that what she was learning from Issa and from the spirit of the wilderness was a precious gift that she must pass along to other women. Where do we go next? She said to Issa one day as the rain poured heavily down outside their cave. It was as if she was reading his own thoughts. Issa sighed and took her into his arms, and once again a strange and perplexing emotion took hold of him. They kissed each other as they had not dared to before, and then pulled back, unsure what to do next. They both realized, rather unwillingly, that the time had come to go their separate ways. Issa needed to continue his pilgrimage into Varanasi and then on to Kapilavastu and Kashmir. And Marie felt she needed to go back to the temple, no longer as a priestess subservient to others, but as a teacher in her own right. Agnivesh would become her protector and anchor as she started the difficult task of sharing her knowledge with those who had been denied this. You have been everything to me in these past months, Marie told Issa that night. You have been father and mother, teacher and friend. You have given me something more precious than life. And I don't know if I've ever loved someone the way I have loved you. Marie, you are part of me now, Issa responded. I've wandered these many years now in so many places. I've grown so far beyond what I knew in my native land. You have taught me about caring and loving like nobody before. I will never forget you. We are the same. We are both strangers in this world. This is the reason we understand each other. Marie squeezed his hand and allowed her head to rest on his shoulder again. They were silent as they held each other. I don't even know what to call this feeling, said Marie. I love you with a love that has no end, and I would gladly follow you for the rest of my life. But I've been with you these many months, and I know your destiny is bigger than even you understand. I would never wish to hold you. I set you free, Issa, my love. Go where you must go now. Issa pulled her head up and kissed her gently on the forehead. Yes, he sighed. I know I have to go. I don't know where my path is taking me, but I do know it is time to move on. Sometimes I wonder how it would be to live a normal life and have a normal family, like most people do. But something drives me over a different path, and I cannot stop now. I know this, Marie sighed, eyes wet with tears. I understand this about you, Issa. But know this also, my lord. If you ever call me to you, I will always come. They went to sleep at last, in each other's arms. When Issa awoke with the dawn, Marie was gone. Chapter 18, Varanasi. A few days later, Issa found himself on the banks of the Ganga in the holy city of Varanasi. It was sunset when he arrived, and he sat for some time by the eastern shore, looking out over the crimson reflection of the setting sun in the sacred waters. Then, leaving his traveling staff and meager belongings by the shore, he waded out into the welcoming coolness of the great river, swimming far out into the distance, exhilarated to finally arrive in this most sacred of Indian cities. Over the next few days, Issa visited temples and talked with local priests. They welcomed him to the city, impressed by his grasp of the language and his understanding of the sacred scriptures. Issa showed them the letter he carried from Swami Agnivesh, certifying that he had passed his training as a monk and that he was qualified to teach. On their part, they were happy to meet a foreigner who was so interested in the scriptures and so accomplished already in the yogic practices. And so Issa became an itinerant teacher, traveling from place to place in that region, preaching and healing wherever he went. His teachings were a composite of all he had learned along the way, from the Essenes and Matthias to the Parsis of Persia, from the Jains in the Sindh to the Jagannath Temple in Puri. He spoke from his heart and made himself relevant to the needs and culture of the people he spoke to. Sometimes he would sit in silent contemplation by the river, and people would join him there, seeking the peace they felt emanating from his presence. Other times he would lead people in the Vedic chants that he found particularly meaningful. Gradually, more and more people would come to sit around him, listening to his stories, marveling at the simple explanation of complex truths, and experiencing the deep healing of his compassionate presence. He became a popular teacher in Varanasi. As time went by, however, tensions began to grow. Issa preached often to the Sudras and the untouchables, teaching them that they were no less capable of experiencing the grace of the Paramatma. He also welcomed women into his congregation, teaching them that all were equally worthy to receive the gifts of spirit. Remembering his time among the leper colonies in Galilee, he would go out and spend time among the lepers and outcasts of society, among the so-called untouchables, healing them as the Essenes had taught them, and sharing with them how they could improve themselves. While many welcomed this fresh breeze that was starting to blow through the city, Issa's teachings did not sit well with the more orthodox Brahmins. They saw him as a young upstart who was trying to upset the entire basis of their time-honored caste system, who was creating chaos and rebellion among the people, and who needed to be restrained before he went too far. As Issa's influence grew, many of the novice priests were themselves attracted to his teachings and presence, and began to slip away from the established matas to go and sit at his feet. This made some of the head Brahmins furious. They came together and decided that the only thing they could do to restore order was to get rid of Issa. Assassins were hired to do away with this troublemaker. However, Issa came to find out about the plot to kill him and managed to silently slip away from Varanasi. He did not like running away and felt sorry to leave behind so many that he had come to love, but realized that, as with all things, there was a divine plan behind this, too. He had been in India for 6 years now and was close to 20 years of age. He began to journey northwards for a few weeks, passing through Gorakhpur, birthplace of the immortal yogi, Gorakhnath, until he arrived in Kapilavastu. Chapter 19, Kapilavastu. It was 500 years ago, Kapilavastu, where the Prince Siddhartha was born, who later became known as the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. It is located in the Shakya kingdom. The story goes that when he was born, his father, the king of the Shakyas, was told by a wise man that his son would grow to be either the greatest of kings or would renounce the world and become the greatest of yogis. Not wishing his son to become a yogi, He kept him carefully protected within the walls of the city, ordering that he not be exposed to anything that might turn his mind away from the riches and pleasures of the material world. As time went by, however, his curiosity grew, and he wished to find out more about the outer world. One day, he ordered his charioteer to take him outside the walls of the city, where he observed a man who was sick and groaning in pain. His heart went out to him in compassion. He had never beheld anyone who was sick before, and he asked his charioteer what it meant. "We all get sick someday," said the charioteer. Again, a few days later, he ordered his charioteer to take him outside the walls of the city, and he observed people wailing around a person who had recently died. "What is the matter with him?" Siddhartha asked in shock. "Why isn't he moving?" "We all die someday," said the charioteer. These two incidents impressed him deeply and placed him into deep turmoil. How is it that we must each get sick and die? He asked himself. What is the purpose then of all these riches and pleasures if they don't last? A few days later, he again went out with his charioteer, and this time observed a man in saffron robes who carried with him nothing but a staff and a begging bowl that radiated the most sublime and aura of peace he had ever seen in his life. "Who is he?" Siddhartha asked his charioteer. "This is a sannyasi, my prince," the charioteer replied. "He has renounced the world to seek the truth of existence." And so the story goes that at 30 years of age, Prince Siddhartha left his young wife and son and joined a band of wandering sannyasis to seek the truth of existence. After wandering for years in the forests, starving himself and practicing severe austerities at times, he had not arrived any closer to his truth. And then one day, as he sat under a Bodhi tree, realization dawned upon him. The truth was simple, and simply had to do with the nature of impermanence. All things were in a constant state of movement and change. Our attempt to hold on to what is familiar or to resist what is unfamiliar is the cause of all of our suffering. If we can simply allow ourselves to enter the river of change and do this willingly, this is the end of suffering, and we are free. Enlightenment is the realization that who we are is the changeless spirit in the world of change. As long as we are identified with our outer senses, we will resist change, and this resistance inevitably causes suffering. When we recognize that we are that which is changeless, we can observe the world of changes without identifying with change, and then we are free. This freedom, therefore, had nothing to do with ascetic practices or the endless rules and regulations that had become part of the spiritual dogma of those times. What we needed to renounce was not the world itself, but our attachments to the world, our expectations and definitions of reality, which kept us stuck within the narrow limits of the mind and senses. Liberation was about moving past the insecurity of the known into the security of the unknown. And therefore it was a path that anyone could follow, from sannyasis in their forests to kings on their thrones. It was simply about discovering our true dharma, which came from entering the domain of our changeless identity, and then allowing ourselves to enter into the drama of our lives with awareness and equanimity. Like Jainism, this teaching was available to all people, regardless of their caste or social status. and was therefore spreading like wildfire throughout the land. 200 years after the Buddha, one of the mighty emperors of India, Ashoka, had in fact become a Buddhist and later sent out missionaries throughout the world to spread these teachings of liberation. But like all teachings, there came a time when the greatness and simplicity of the original revelation became distorted into words without the essence and rules without the experience. In the time of Issa, a number of monasteries had sprung up in different parts of the world, each claiming to be true to the original teachings of the Buddha, but burdened down with endless rules and rituals, not unlike so many other religions of those times which he had encountered along his journeys. Issa had always felt a fascination for Prince Siddhartha and wished to experience his original teachings, and so he joined the monastery in Kapilavastu, so he could study these teachings in the language of Siddhartha, which was Pali. He remained for 3 years, learning the language, studying the Buddhist scriptures, and meditating among the foothills of the Himalayas. Chapter 20. Ananda. His preceptor was named Ananda, a simple monk who radiated self-knowledge and compassion. During his first interview with Issa, he provided Issa with the framework of the Buddha's teachings on the Eightfold Path of Liberation. The teachings were not based on philosophy, but on Siddhartha's personal experience, he said. The essence of the teachings, as he summarized for Issa, was simply to live as a good human being without getting too attached to extremes. Self-awareness was the key to insight, and insight into the nature of illusion eventually led to liberation, a state he referred to as nirvana, where all the subconscious tendencies of the mind were emptied out. These subconscious tendencies, or vasanas, were the source of addictions. Addictions led to attachments. Attachments led to suffering. Once you realize that all things change within the realm of the mind, you come to realize the changeless self that exists beyond the mind. In realizing this, you become free of Mara and a web of illusions, and thus free of suffering. Who is this Mara? Inquired Issa. Mara is the goddess within whom all creation takes form, responded Ananda. It is the realm of manifestation, where all things arise. He paused for emphasis. But it is not who you are. As long as you identify with created forms, you are caught in her web of illusion. As long as you are identified with form, you are beholden to the laws of creation, where all things are in constant motion. He pointed to the clouds drifting across the sky. All things change and are constantly changing, continued Ananda. Resistance to change is the root of all fear, even the fear of death. Mara's role is to keep us trapped in the illusion of form and creation, mind and movement. It is not an illusion as far as your senses go, but the senses themselves are an illusion if what you're looking for is permanence. Our path is to move beyond impermanence into that which is permanent, beyond the appearance of reality to that which is eternally real, beyond the illusions of the mind to that which exists beyond form, beyond the mind, and beyond the senses. And this is Atma? Inquired Issa. Ananda was silent for a while, weighing within himself what he wished to say. You can call it what you like, he said finally. Just don't get attached to your ideas of what this means. There is a great subtlety within the mind that seeks for concepts and then equates these concepts with direct experience. I see within you a great and precious jewel. The light of your intellect is strong, and you have traveled far within yourself. But be aware, he continued, the coarse illusions of the mind no longer hold sway over you. But look for the subtle webs of Mara, for this is the territory where many great souls have become ensnared. It is where you create an illusion of freedom based on concepts of freedom. The interview came to an end with Ananda welcoming Issa into the monastery and introducing him to the daily routines. In contrast to the bustle of Varanasi, living in the monastery here provided him with a sense of outer serenity, where he could deeply examine his own nature. He dived into himself, attempting to examine the inner workings of his mind, the motivations and conditioning that shaped his thoughts and actions. He recognized, just as the Buddha before him, that there was only a small fraction of his thoughts and feelings that he was consciously aware of. The greater portion lay unquestioned within the subconscious mind, and this comprised the realm of the unconscious ego. He came to see that the personal ego could not coexist with awareness. As soon as the light of awareness was brought into the unconscious depths of the mind, it released the mind from Mara, the illusion of personal ego. This Mara, or Maya, as the Hindus called it, was the great illusion, ignorance of the true nature of our mind and motivations, leads to the creation of a separate, illusory self, which we tend to identify with as who we are. Issa recognized that, ironically, many seekers on the spiritual path tended to unconsciously amplify their identification with this illusory self by denying or projecting so-called unspiritual aspects of themselves. Anything we don't like about ourselves, therefore, becomes stuffed down into the closet of the subconscious mind, creating a split within our consciousness that becomes difficult to resolve. When this split becomes too great for our own comfort, we tend to project these undesirable traits onto other people or outer circumstances, thus creating even more separation and leading to judgment, conflict, and more suffering. It is from this perspective Issa realized that our entire conception of good and evil was derived. Good and evil did not exist outside of us, but was simply the personification of that which was acceptable or unacceptable to our own ideas about ourselves. What if this entire idea of self was itself the illusion? Once this illusion could be grasped, then we could shift naturally into the changeless identity beyond ideas of right or wrong, pleasant or unpleasant, good or evil. All we needed then, realized Issa, with a wave of profound insight, is simply to see ourselves clearly. There is no need to blame or judge ourselves for our essentially human condition. No need to even attempt to change something that is impossible to change. Just see it clearly for what it is. This clarity itself, shining in the darkness of our unconscious mind, would become the guiding light of illumination. We do not need a priest or anybody else to be shown this path. Each of us was a lamp unto ourselves. All we needed was to courageously examine our own thoughts and motivations. This, he realized, was what the Buddha's last battle was about. That night, when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, all the illusions of the mind came up to the surface, one last time, fighting for supremacy. Accomplishments and failures, strengths and weaknesses, ideas of right and wrong, certainties about the nature of reality, rose up and fell away, as Siddhartha simply watched, witnessing, not identifying with any of it. When it was done, he was emptied out. And in that great emptying out, the Buddha was born. Issa realized this was his own task now. As Ananda had gently hinted at his first interview, he had filled himself with so many ideas and concepts about the nature of God, life, and reality. He had spent so many years of his own life in this search for ultimate reality. He had built so many identities around himself, ethnic and cultural identities, social identities, even spiritual identities. He saw himself as a good man, kind and compassionate, a seeker of truth and justice, a healer and friend to all in need. But what about those times when he felt angry, condemning, lonely, lustful, or disillusioned? And what about other qualities that were just as human? He had grown attached to spiritual identity, and subtle as it was, this also had become part of the illusion. He recognized that his task as a spiritual seeker was not to become a better seeker. This only contributed to polishing up the spiritual ego, which was in some ways even more insidious than the material ego. The task of a spiritual seeker was simply to develop self-awareness, to become aware of the rising and falling of thoughts and sensations, moods and emotions, neither becoming attached to an ideal nor condemning self or another for falling short of that ideal. Awareness leads to equanimity, he realized, which refines the ego to a point where it naturally discovers its identity in joyful service to the Atma. All right, so let's stop there and continue on next week. So thanks for joining me, and take those questions inside yourself as well. And these are very simple directives that we can each take to heart on our own journey of illumination, our own journey of liberation, our own journey of enlightenment. So thank you for joining me.